What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Almost week 16. Congrats to all of you who made it to the fantasy semifinals. Good luck to those of you who need help in tonight's games. I'll be advancing as long as Jefferson doesn't outscore Addison by at least 33 points. But I also need Jefferson and Myers to combine for at least 34 half PPR points. So tonight definitely matters a lot for me. Let me know in the comment section what you guys need to advance. Assuming you are able to make it to week 16, we actually have a relatively strong week for waivers, mostly because of the running back position. Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara, Tony Pollard all suffered injuries, and while two of them don't seem major, it's possible that only Chubb misses time. You never really know what teams are going to do with injuries at this point of the season when they're eliminated from playoffs. So we'll start off with the running back position. Again, top three, I would rank it as Jerome Ford, then Tyjae Spears, then Kendre Miller. I think you could definitely flip-flop Tyjae Spears and Kendre Miller, and realistically, it will all come down to these injuries. Does Kamara miss? Does Tony Pollard miss? If it's only one of them, obviously you're going to want the one where the starter is missing time. I'm just listing Spears first because if both were to miss, both Alvin Kamara and Tony Pollard, then Spears would be more valuable than Kendre Miller, just given his role in the receiving game plus matchup. Pretty indisputable, though, that Jerome Ford is the top option, though, because we know that Nick Chubb will not be playing next week. He did break his foot. So they're down to Jerome Ford, Donta Foreman, and Pierre Strong as their top three running backs. Ford has pretty easily performed the best in that group this season. So while the other two are probably going to mix in, I would imagine they do go with the three running back committee. It'll basically just be Foreman getting a couple carries on the ground, maybe Strong mixing in for like a carry or two, maybe a couple targets as well. It's a good matchup. They play at the Bengals. It is likely when I do the projections, of course, I have not done yet that. It is Monday morning, but when I do the projections, I would imagine that Jerome Ford does come out as a running back two, probably a back half running back two, and so it's worth spending a number one claim on him, all your remaining fab. Honestly, for any of these three that are available, I'm cool emptying your fab. I'm cool using number one claim. Even if we don't 100% know if the starters aren't going to be playing, you're one win away from the championship if you are playing this week. And so even if there's a chance that you're going to be starting one of these three and they're going to help you get over that bump, it's like, what are you rostering this fab for, right? Maybe you make it and then next week there's another injury that helps you out, but the odds every week are so much smaller and you just got to get to the championship. So if you think one of these can help you, definitely empty that fab and spend the number one claim. Again, Spears, I think, is number two for me right now, just not knowing if these running backs are going to play next week. He didn't do anything on the ground. I think it was like 4 carries for 5 yards, but had 6 receptions, 87 yards, and a touchdown through the air. Also had that goal line rushing score. He'd be in line for around 20 opportunities if Pollard were to miss. And again, a good chunk of that would come in the receiving game. Love that in fantasy. Decent workload again against the Colts. Relatively decent matchup in a game they could win. So he'd be number two. And then Kendre. The tough part about him is, of course, again, we don't know with Alvin Kamara, but he's at the Packers. And so I haven't seen that line come out yet, but I checked the numbers from last week. So you guys know my model simulates every possible matchup. So I checked what would it have been if this game happened last week and you had Saints at Packers. What would the spread be? And my model said it should be around 12 points. That the Saints should be 12-point road underdogs. And given how the games went this last week, you'd think that would be even wider. So there's a chance that the Saints are 2-touchdown road underdogs this week. So even if you had Kamara out, you had Kendre in line for 15 opportunities, it's a terrible spot. And so again, if we had all the starters out, it'd be Ford, then Spears, then Kendre Miller. Other running back options are Kimani Vidal, Kenneth Gainwell, Donta Foreman, and Pierre Strong. Vidal did take over as the 1A this week, a little later than Best Ball Pros were hoping would happen, but he took over as the 1A, 3 carries, 3 targets. It's just, they didn't have much volume go to the running backs here. They threw the ball a lot, just not seeing a lot of volume on offense. There's no way you're actually starting him this week against the Broncos. Maybe there's a chance you roster him. He is again the 1A, maybe the clear one against the Broncos, and then you play him the championship the following week. Odds are, though, you'll never be starting Kimani Vidal this season. Kenneth Gainwell an option. He'd basically be a handcuff for Saquon. So Saquon did get injured last week. He kind of played in and out. He said that he's fine. He's going to play next week. But you never know. Maybe the injury is a little bit worse than he thinks it is. He has time to sleep on it. He goes throughout the week and it's like, oh, it's not really getting much better. Maybe he suffers a setback in practice. Like, these are all possible things that can happen. And if you did get Saquon missing, Gainwell, would be flex viable this coming week. Again, I don't know exactly how the projections will go, but he'd have a decent workload on the ground and a good workload through the air. So he'd be someone you'd maybe start at running back 2 in the flex spot. But again, the odds are that Saquon will be playing this next week. And then with Foreman, Strong, I'd say more if you're in like a 14 or 16 team league. I'm in a 16 team league, just missed the playoffs, but I know how desperate you can be at the running back 2 position, especially like the second flex spot. We have 2 flex spots in that league. I know how desperate you can be at times, and so any running back in these deeper formats that has a chance at 5 to 7 touches is actually viable. So 8, 10, 12 team leagues, you don't need to look at Foreman, you don't need to look at Pierre Strong, but in deeper formats, there are options. Again, winnable game against the Bengals. At wide receiver, there's very little. Nothing happened this week that was anything like crazy, out of the ordinary, no massive role changes, but I would say the top options are Romeo Doubs, Rashad Bateman, Jalen McMillan, and then Jalen Coker. All posted really good games this last week. All should have pretty strong roles to close the season. So if you are in more a deeper format, they are more viable. I'd say Romeo Doubs is the one, 8, 10, 12 team leagues. He is viable to use in the flex spot. He is like the top wide receiver on that team right now. The problem is you've got that spot we talked about before where they're home versus the Saints. So great matchup, against the opposing defense. Like, they're not going to stop them. They're going to score a decent amount of points. It's just the Saints aren't going to keep up, right? So what happens if Jacobs scores 2 touchdowns on the ground and then Reed gets an end-around touchdown or screen pass touchdown? What if Watson hits deep? Like, what if they just score a couple touchdowns before Romeo Doubs gets involved? The odds that he's been on free agency and you're in a 10-team league and you're like, yes, going after Doubs and I'm starting him this week, minimal. So odds are you're not going there. And then for the other guys, really, unless you're in a 14 or 16 team league, you're probably not using them, but they're in a weird range where it's like, you don't need them in the leagues where you can get them, and then you probably can't get them in the leagues where you need them, right? Like, yeah, you probably use other guys in 14 or 16 team leagues, but they're not available, right? This free agency in those leagues are very thin. So again, Doubs top option, best matchup, most likely to be someone you're actually going after, but you probably won't be doing that. Bateman, he'll be needed against the Steelers, but you're kind of chasing points with him. That was the first game of his career where he had 2 touchdowns. Still only has 1 game with 5 or more receptions on the season. He will need to hit on a long touchdown to be viable in your lineup next week, and the odds are still low that he does that. McMillan, finally doing what I thought he'd be doing all season. He's breaking out, but it's happening later than I was hoping it would occur. Definitely has some upside at Dallas this week, but in terms of trusting him in the semifinals, I'm not sure I'd do that unless it's a 14 or 16 team league. And then I talked about Jalen Coker when he was first breaking out a little while ago before he suffered the injury. I think he's talented. I think he's actually a player that we might be utilizing in future years. He did overtake David Moore as soon as he was healthy last week, kind of mixing in and out with Adam Thielen as like that top option. We also have the injury to Xavier Legette. So an option, right? But it's the same thing as McMillan. It's more like these are 2 guys I think we're going to like in future years in terms of helping us in fantasy playoffs. They're probably not going to do that. At quarterback, I pray you do not need to go here. I pray that you have something. You've been streaming. You figured it out. I don't think you need to go here. But all I'm seeing is really Cooper Rush. He's been pretty solid recently. 8 touchdowns, 8 passing touchdowns to just 1 interception over the last 4 weeks. That's pretty good. Gets a home matchup with the Bucs this week. That's a great matchup. And I don't believe Dallas is mathematically eliminated. I think they're technically still in contention. I don't think they're making playoffs, but they technically still could. So all of his weapons are still going to be out there. Don't worry about them like benching CeeDee Lamb because they're tanking. They're not. They're technically still in it. So if he's got all his weapons for another week in a good matchup and playing well, you could do worse than Cooper Rush. At tight end, you got 2 pretty clear options. Brenton Strange and Dalton Schultz. Strange is an option because of the Evan Ingram injury, and then Schultz is an option because Cade Stover had that emergency appendectomy. I forget who else. I think it was another tight end maybe that had the emergency appendectomy earlier in the year. I don't know why all these guys are having that. But I don't think, obviously I don't know everything about this, but I'm pretty sure Stover can't return this next week. I think it'd be like the week after that. It was Marshawn Lloyd had the appendicitis, having that surgery. I think it takes a few weeks. I don't think you can just like have the surgery and then go back out there and play football. So I'm pretty sure Stover is not going to play next week. So we're still going to have both these two, Brenton Strange and Dalton Schultz, as number one tight ends for their team this coming week. In the 5 games that Evan Ingram has missed this season, Strange has 6, 5, 3, 4, and 12 targets. Now, it's worth noting that one 12-target game came last week with his only game with Mac Jones at quarterback in terms of like being the starter. Mac Jones historically has targeted tight end position at a pretty high rate, but it's also worth noting that the Jaguars ran 77 plays. So if we see his workload without an Evan Ingram, he's not getting double-digit every time. Again, 6, 5, 3, 4, and 12, and the 12 came in a 77-play game. Even counting that 77-play game, they are last in the league with 57 plays per game. So on average, they are not doing that. They're not running a ton of plays. Odds are we see Brenton Strange go back to that like 5 or 6 target range, which will make him like a mid to low end tight end 2, but definitely not a tight end 1. Don't expect that to happen again. And then Schultz had a good role this last week, 94% of the snaps. That'll probably repeat again. They're at Kansas City, so even if you didn't have Mahomes playing, I think Mahomes is going to play. But even if this didn't happen, the matchup still shifts you towards the pass because they're so good on the against running backs. But again, it's Schultz. Like we've historically not liked Dalton Schultz on this channel. So my lean is Brenton Strange if you do need a streamer. But again, neither one of these two are going to project as top 12 options. Then finally, defense streaming. I'm going to include basically all of what I think the top options are, even if they're very likely to already be rostered in your league, just so some people don't get mad or think I'm overlooking things. I've obviously not done the full defense rankings yet because, again, it is Monday. There are still 4 teams to play tonight. But my guess as to how I'll kind of rank things are the Vikings at the Seahawks. That depends on Geno Smith, but if there's a chance that we get Sam Howell starting, he's the king of taking sacks, you're going to want the Vikings defense. Bills versus the Patriots, obvious reasons. You're in Buffalo. Patriots are a team that gives up a ton of points to opposing defenses. Packers versus the Saints. The Saints offense is decimated by injury. Packers are a very good defense. Colts versus the Titans. Even terrible defenses are apparently all going off against the Titans. You've got the Bengals versus the Browns. Jameis, turnover machine. So even though the Bengals aren't good defense, it's a good matchup. You've got the Falcons versus the Giants. Again, obvious reasons. And then the Lions at the Bears. That one's just going to depend on kind of how the Bears look tonight. If they're still taking sacks, they don't look amazing. We'll like the Lions defense, but Lions have been hurt on defense recently. Bears maybe could be ascending on offense. So that's kind of why they're maybe lower on the list than you would have expected. And again, I just want to point out Colts. The Colts have a great week, 16 and 17 matchup. So even though I didn't list them as the number 1 ranked defense, I don't think they'll be the number 1 ranked defense this week. They're home versus the Titans this week, but then at the Giants in week 17. So they're an option for both. You won't have to roster 2 defenses. That's pretty valuable. You can roster the Colts plus maybe a running back handcuff in case there's an injury. That's just better than trying to roster 2 different defenses. Again, they're a great option this week versus the Titans, but then also next week at the Giants. So if you can add anyone, I would probably prefer to do them. So good luck, again, to anyone who needs something good to happen tonight. We are rooting for a great game from Justin Jefferson, just not a complete nuke. Let me know what you need to happen in the comment section below, and I'll see you all Thursday morning for the Week 16 rankings video.